Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the year 506 CE, a time when the world wakes up one morning to find the sun wrong. You're standing in the heart of Constantinople, the clamor of the market a little quieter than usual, because people keep glancing up at the sky instead of their shopping. The date is somewhere in early spring, but the light feels like late dusk, thin, bluish and cold. Shadows aren't sharp anymore, they blur at the edges, like someone smudged the whole city with charcoal, and the air, it smells faintly metallic, like you've stepped into the forge of a blacksmith who forgot to light the fire. You probably won't survive this. That's not hyperbole. You live in a world where one bad harvest can kill half a province, and with this weird sky, those crops you've been counting on, they might never ripen. If you're here to unravel the year without sunlight, the mysterious global fog, settle in. We're about to walk you through collapsing harvests, panicked empires, frozen summers, and the science that still puzzles experts today. Drop your current location and local time in the comments. Let's see from where on this bright little earth you're watching a story about a time when daylight itself nearly disappeared. And when the fog lifts on our tale tonight, well, you might be glad you're living in the century of electric lighting and central heating. So the sun isn't right, and neither is the air. You notice the first clue while crossing the Mies, Constantinople's main thoroughfare. The gold tiles on the Church of the Holy Apostles should blaze like fire under the midday sun. Instead, they're dull, as if someone laid a thin sheet of wax paper over the world. A street vendor selling figs mutters to another, "It's the end times." They both laugh, but it's that brittle, nervous kind of laugh that makes you glance over your shoulder. The next clue comes from the sound. Usually pigeons wheel overhead in noisy flocks, cooing and flapping, but they're strangely quiet today. The city feels muffled, as though the fog up there has pressed a heavy blanket over every street and dome. Even the Bosporus seems subdued. The bright sparkle of sun on water is gone, replaced by a flat, dull gleam. You're not imagining it. Across the city, people are talking. In the palace, Emperor Justinian's court physicians report that the light has dimmed, not just in Constantinople, but in Antioch, Alexandria, and as far as the grain ports of Egypt. By evening, runners arrive from the docks, bringing news from merchant ships, the same eerie sky blankets the Aegean, the Adriatic, and the Levant. And here's where it gets unnerving. You can look directly at the sun, no squinting, no tearing eyes. It hovers like a ghostly pale disk, giving off light but no warmth. Some say it looks like the moon, others whisper that God has turned his face away. You can't feel the usual midday heat on your skin. The air stays chill enough to raise goosebumps, even as the calendar insists it's the season of planting. The city's calendar is everything. Its rhythm dictates the planting of wheat in Thrace, the arrival of grain ships from Egypt, the preparation for festivals and trade fairs. This dimming, it's throwing every calculation into question. Farmers in the countryside are already behind on sowing because the soil feels wrong, too cold, too wet. In villages near the city, shepherds report lambs shivering in barns that should be warm by now. Rumors ripple through the streets. Maybe an eclipse is stuck in place. Maybe the barbarians in the north have lit fires so vast the smoke has reached heaven. Maybe, if you believe the more superstitious, angels are waging war beyond the clouds and the sky itself is wounded. In the wine shops, the talk is more pragmatic. This much dimness means less growth. Less growth means bad harvests. Bad harvests mean prices will jump like startled hares. A merchant with a good stock of dried figs will name his price in gold by winter, and that's if things don't get worse. And worse they do get. By the second week the pattern is undeniable. Mornings begin grey and stay that way until nightfall. The sun never climbs higher than a pale smudge. Even fires seem dimmer, as if the very air resists brightness. The grain markets in the Forum of Constantine see frantic buying, not just by the poor, but by wealthy households who fear what's coming. Bakers cut loaves smaller, fishmongers raise their prices, because the fishermen say fewer boats are venturing out into these strange, cold waters. In your own neighborhood, an old woman who has seen 70 winters shakes her head and says she remembers the last bad year, but this is not the same. She tells you to salt whatever you can, meat, beans, even greens, before summer fails. Her hands are quick and practiced, packing herbs into jars of vinegar. The smell is sharp in the dim kitchen, a small reminder of warmth in a cooling world. Still, no one knows why, and that's the scariest part. You're in a century without telescopes, without weather satellites, without even a good map of the whole world. If the sun fades, you have no way to find the source, only to suffer the effects. For now you keep your head down, your pantry stocked, and your eyes on the pale ghost above, wondering how long it will linger. And if you're honest, you hope you don't find out the hard way. You wake the next day, hoping the light will be back to normal, but it isn't. The sun rises late, if you can call it rising at all. It just seeps up behind the misty veil, casting that same cold, silvery light across the streets. Word has already spread that Procopius himself, the imperial historian, has noted the phenomenon. That means this isn't just gossip from fishermen and merchants. It's official enough to enter the empire's record. Procopius writes that the sun has shone without brightness, like the moon, for nearly the whole year, and its light was not as it is wont to be. Coming from a man whose job is to chronicle events for the ages, those words carry weight. You picture him sitting in his study near the Hagia Sophia, quill scratching against parchment, describing a sky that refuses to clear. The chronicler of emperors is paying attention, so is the emperor himself. In the palace, Justinian's advisors are divided. Some see the dimming as a natural event, perhaps a dust storm from far-off deserts, or vapors from volcanic lands they've only heard about in sailors' tales. Others whisper in the candlelit corridors that this is divine punishment, a warning to the empire for its sins, or to Justinian personally for his ambitions. You hear that in the hippodrome. The factions, the blues and the greens, have turned the strange light into another weapon for their endless squabbles. Blues mutter that God is angry because Justinian has allowed too much pagan influence to linger in the law. Greens counter that the emperor has meddled too much in church doctrine. It's a strange thing to see politics and faith mixing with weather in the same heated argument. On the streets, though, people aren't debating theology, they're worried about food. The cool air lingers into the middle of the day. The mild breeze that should carry the scent of spring flowers instead smells faintly of damp stone. The grapevines in the nearby countryside are slow to bud, their leaves small and pale. Messengers from Antioch arrive with grim news. The same gloom has settled there, muting the rich colors of its mosaics and chilling the air over the Orontes River. Reports from Alexandria confirm the same. Even Egypt, breadbasket of the empire, isn't spared. This rattles everyone, because Egypt's dependable sunshine is the foundation of the Byzantine food supply. In the markets, you watch as olive oil sellers glance nervously at their wares. Oil is liquid sunlight, stored in golden form, and if the olive harvest fails, the price will soar. Already some sellers keep their best amphorae hidden in back, releasing only small amounts each day. You notice buyers tucking away extra loaves of bread, salted fish and dried fruit, as if they know something you don't. At the baths, you overhear a senator's slave telling another that the emperor has ordered astrologers to read the sky. If the heavens are sending a message, he wants to know what it is. You imagine scholars peering through the haze, measuring the pale disk's position, and arguing whether it is larger or smaller than before. By now the dimming has lasted weeks. The golden mosaics in the Hagia Sophia no longer blaze. They glimmer faintly in the half-light as if lit by dusk candles instead of the sun. In the Forum, people stop more often to light lamps before their shops, even at midday. The city smells faintly of oil and smoke at all hours. Some try to keep life normal. Bread is still baked, ships still come and go, sermons are still preached, but there's an unease that doesn't fade. People glance up more often, looking for a change, and every day they're disappointed. In one corner of the city, you see a small crowd gathered around a man claiming he's had visions, dreams of a black sun, of stars falling, of a cold that will never end. He warns that the end is near. Whether they believe him or not, they all stay to listen, because right now, even a terrible prophecy feels like a kind of answer. At night, the darkness is absolute. The moon and stars still shine, but the days are so dim that the boundary between day and night blurs in your mind. You can feel the city's mood shifting. It's not panic yet. People are too proud for that, but it's something colder, quiet, the same kind of silence that settles just before a storm breaks. And somewhere, you suspect, this strange sky is doing more than just unnerving people. It's planting the seeds of a crisis that will reach far beyond Constantinople. By the time spring edges into what should be summer, the gloom hasn't lifted. If anything, it's deepened. The dimness is no longer just an oddity. It's starting to bite. You hear it first in the market, where the vegetable stalls look thin. Turnips, onions and cabbages are smaller than usual, and there are fewer of them. When you ask a farmer from Thrace why, he shrugs and says the plants simply won't grow. The sun's not feeding them, he mutters, as if sunlight is a kind of food, which in a way it is. In the countryside, wheat fields that should be rippling gold by midsummer are patchy and stunted. You ride past rows of stalks, barely reaching your knee. their green fading to a sickly yellow. The soil feels damp and cool underfoot when it should be dry and warm by now. Even the air seems heavier, holding the moisture like a constant early morning fog. The first real signs of trouble arrive when grain merchants start hoarding. They're not fools. If the harvest is bad, they can name whatever price they want in a few months. The city government tries to crack down, sending inspectors to count sacks in the storehouses, but corruption seeps in quickly. A few bribes and a wink, and the inspectors move on without opening every door. You begin to hear murmurs about the hunger year. They start quietly whispered over bread and watered wine. Then they become more open as prices rise. Bread that cost a single follis now costs 2. Some bakers start mixing more bran and even ground up acorns into their loaves to stretch the flour further. The taste is bitter, but no one complains too loudly. The trouble isn't just in Constantinople. Reports come from across the empire. Grain shipments from Egypt are smaller, late, or spoiled. In Sicily, barley is being ground into coarse meal months earlier than usual because people can't wait for it to fully ripen. In the Balkans, herders are slaughtering animals earlier in the season to save what little feed they have. And that's the other problem, the animals. Without enough fodder, the cows give less milk, the sheep produce less wool, and the chickens lay fewer eggs. Even the fishing fleets are struggling. Cold currents seem to have shifted, and the usual summer shoals are absent. Some fishermen return empty-handed after days at sea. The streets of the poorer quarters grow tense. People start to eye the bread sellers with suspicion, muttering that they're holding back the best loaves for the rich. You see mothers cutting bread into thinner slices for their children, scraping the last of the olive oil from the jar and swiping it across the bread with a fingertip. By late summer, the signs of strain are everywhere. You pass gardens where beans have withered on the vine, the fruit in the orchards is smaller and harder, and some never ripens at all before it falls. Smoke from cooking fires smells stronger in the streets, not because there's more of it, but because fewer pots are bubbling, and the scent of food stands out all the more. In the countryside, whole villages hold emergency meetings. Some decide to slaughter more livestock now and preserve the meat before winter, fearing they won't be able to keep animals alive through the cold season. Others begin to barter furiously for grain from luckier regions. The barter rates are steep. Furs, tools, and even family heirlooms traded for sacks of barley. You hear of one Thracian village where they dug up grain stored from the previous year, grain meant for planting, and ate it instead. That's a bad sign. Eating seed grain means there may be nothing to sow next year if conditions don't improve. In Constantinople, the emperor orders extra shipments of grain from as far away as the Black Sea coast, and even from the Persian frontier. But moving food that far is expensive and risky. Pirates in the Aegean hear about the shortages and start targeting grain ships. One captured vessel means hundreds of people in some city will go without bread. The mood changes from unease to a kind of restless, simmering fear. People are still polite, still going about their daily lives, but there's a tautness in the air. You can feel it in the way a merchant grips his scales tighter when measuring out grain, or how a housewife's eyes dart toward your basket to see if you've managed to get something she hasn't. And in the back of your mind you keep wondering how long this can last before the city's patience, like its bread, runs out. Far from Constantinople, in the cities and farmlands of China, the same strange haze is hanging in the sky, only here the imperial court calls it wu, the word for mist, or fog. In early summer 53-6 CE, officials in the northern Wei and Lang dynasties are recording something deeply unsettling in their meticulous chronicles. Snow falling in summer, frost biting the fields when rice should be ripening, and the sun itself looking as if it had lost its fire. You're walking the crowded streets of Jiankang, modern-day Nanjing, on what the calendar insists is a summer day, but you're wearing a heavier robe than usual. The river breeze feels like it's coming from early spring, not the hottest months of the year. The usual warm, damp air that clings to your skin is gone, replaced by a crispness that makes you pull your sleeves tighter. Rice farmers along the Yangtze are worried. They kneel in flooded paddies, running their hands through water that feels far too cold for this time of year. The shoots are growing slowly, they're green, pale and thin. Some fields show patches where the plants have simply died. In a society where rice is more than just food, it's life, this is the kind of omen that sets whole villages on edge. The imperial court dispatches inspectors to gather reports. They ride for days, stopping in hamlets and market towns, writing down how the fog seems to dull the light and how the cold lingers even at midday. One farmer tells them that in his 60 years he has never seen a summer when frost killed sprouts. Another says the water buffalo are refusing to wade into the paddies, as if they sense something unnatural. In the capital, astronomers climb to the top of observation towers and stare at the pale disk above. The great bronze armillary spheres they use to track the heavens show no strange alignment of planets, no eclipses, no comets, yet the light is undeniably wrong, thin, washed out, the color of old jade. The emperor's ministers debate causes. Some whisper that the northern tribes have set vast steppe fires to weaken their enemies with a sky famine. Others suggest that distant mountains have belched out smoke that has drifted across the seas. More superstitious voices mutter about dragons stirring in the earth, sending vapor skyward. The bureaucracy does not take famine lightly. Officials begin implementing emergency measures, ordering the release of grain from state storehouses, reducing taxes in the hardest-hit prefectures, and issuing edicts forbidding the hoarding of rice. Punishments for price gouging become severe, and a few unscrupulous traders find themselves publicly flogged in the marketplace as a warning. Still, these measures can only do so much. As the months pass, reports of summer snow appear again. In the highlands, whole apricot orchards fail, their blossoms shriveled by frost. In the markets, the usual baskets of peaches and plums are scarce. Those that appear are small, sour and spotted. People begin substituting millet for rice where they can, but millet too struggles in the cold and its yield is meager. The Yangtze grain barges that normally glide toward the capital heavy with rice now ride higher in the water, their loads lighter than they should be. Dock workers notice and shake their heads. Everyone knows what lighter loads mean: higher prices and leaner meals. At the same time, rumors spread that the phenomenon is not confined to China. Traders returning from India, Central Asia, and even the Persian Gulf tell of the same dim sun and failing crops. Caravans moving along the Silk Road carry not just silk and spices but stories of snow in the wrong months, of rivers freezing early, of hungry cities. And with every new rumor, the people of Jiankang look up at the pale sky and wonder how far this darkness truly reaches. The imperial record keepers are careful. They inscribe the events of 56 CE in the official histories with phrases like, "In this year, yellow dust and mist covered the sky, crops failed in many regions, the sun appeared dim, without brilliance." It is a dry summary, but you know what it really means. The empire's greatest asset, its stable, predictable seasons, has been shaken. The mist is no longer just a curiosity. It is becoming the first act of a slow-moving disaster, and as the chill deepens, you can feel the pressure building, politically, socially, and in the bellies of millions who depend on the sky to keep its promises. Across the sea from Britain, and down through the misty green hills of Ireland, the gloom has its own chroniclers. In the small candle-lit scriptoria of monasteries, monks scratch the year's events into vellum with blunt quills, noting not only the passing of kings and the deaths of abbots, but the weather itself, because here the weather can make or break entire communities. In the annals of Ulster, the entry for 53/6 CE is simple but chilling: a failure of bread. That's it. No elaboration, no poetry, just 4 words that tell you everything you need to know. In a land where barley and oats are the backbone of life, a bread failure means hunger. Hunger that can stretch from autumn into the next year, claiming not just the weak but anyone caught unprepared. You're in a monastic settlement on the coast, the gulls wheeling overhead strangely silent in the pale, colorless light. The brothers here have noticed the same strange dimness reported from Constantinople to China. Even the midday sun barely casts a shadow across the rough stone cloister. The monastery's gardens are slow to sprout, the cabbage heads loose and pale. In the surrounding countryside, farmers bring their troubles to the monks, who double as local advisors. They speak of frost in the early summer, of oats that fail to ripen before being flattened by cold rains. In some fields the stalks have simply rotted where they stood, the heads empty of grain. By midsummer, word spreads that this is not just a local blight. Messengers from the south, passing along the ancient roadways, bring tidings of the same conditions across Britain and Gaul: stunted crops, a strange haze in the air, and a sun you can look at without flinching. The Irish countryside reacts as it always does to hardship, with a mix of resilience and ruthless practicality. Families begin slaughtering animals early, salting the meat in great wooden barrels to make it last through the winter. Smoke from the curing fires drifts over the villages, mixing with the sea fog, until the horizon itself looks like it's fading. In the monasteries, the monks increase their own stores. Barrels of salted herring are rolled into cool stone cellars, sacks of dried peas stacked against the wall, honey precious for its sweetness and for the mead it can make. is sealed away in clay jars. If this is to be a hunger year, they will be ready. Still, preparation can only go so far when the scale of the problem is unknown. No one in Ireland has yet grasped that the dimming is global. They think it might be a bad year, maybe two, but not a chain of cold seasons that could drag on for a decade. And the hunger does come. By autumn, bread becomes harder to find in the villages. Oats and barley are stretched with whatever can be ground: acorns, wild roots, even dried seaweed. The taste is bitter, and the loaves crumble easily, but hunger makes almost anything edible. Some families send their younger members to live with relatives inland, away from the storm-prone coasts where fishing is failing too. The usual summer shoals of herring have been scarce, and the fishermen who brave the rougher seas return with smaller catches. The monasteries become centers of both charity and quiet competition. Those with surplus grain give alms to the poor, but there are always more mouths than loaves. A quiet tension grows as winter approaches. People begin to watch each other's stores, to note who still has sheep in the fields, who still burns meat over their hearth. And through it all, the pale sun hangs in the sky like a constant reminder. No matter the prayers, no matter the rituals, its light remains weak, and its warmth never returns. You can see it in the eyes of the farmers, as they stand in their empty fields, looking up with a mixture of defiance and dread. Ireland has weathered bad years before, but this one feels different. This one feels longer. If you've been following the trail from Constantinople to China, to the green hills of Ireland, you've probably noticed a pattern. Everywhere, people are staring upward and searching for answers. But in 53-6 CE, answers come from faith, superstition, and whatever ancient law your culture keeps close to its heart. In the Eastern Roman Empire, sermons grow sharper. Priests warn that the dim sun is a sign of God's anger, perhaps for the empire's pride, or its endless wars. The mosaics inside the churches still glitter faintly by lamplight, but they've lost the blaze they once had under bright sunlight. The faithful kneel longer, cross themselves more often, and mutter prayers against famine. Across Europe, pagan traditions still alive in rural areas offer other explanations. In the Alpine valleys, some whisper that frost giants are stirring again, breathing their icy breath into the sky. In the far north, old skaldic tales begin to circulate more often, stories of Fimbulvetra, the great winter that comes before the end of the world when the sun hides and wolves roam freely. In the Abbasid predecessor states, to the south and east, astrologers pore over charts, tracing the positions of Jupiter and Saturn. Some claim the conjunctions are unfavorable, that the heavens themselves have turned against humanity. In China, court scholars debate in the Hall of State, their sleeves trailing across bamboo scrolls filled with omens. A pale sun, they argue, could mean the emperor has lost the mandate of heaven. If the ruler cannot command the skies, what right has he to command the earth? Ministers tread carefully, for to say this too plainly is to risk one's head. Among common folk, the search for meaning becomes deeply personal. You see farmers hanging talismans over their barn doors, fishermen refusing to set out on certain days because the pale light feels unlucky. In one coastal village of the Levant, you watch as a group gathers at dawn to burn incense and chant toward the horizon, hoping to coax the sun back to its full strength. Markets buzz with small rituals. Traders sprinkle salt at the edge of their stalls to ward off the hunger, and bakers mark crosses into their loaves before baking, more as a charm than a decoration. In Rome, still clinging to its faded grandeur, soothsayers do a brisk business reading omens in the entrails of chickens, looking for signs of when the sky will clear. The explanations are as varied as the people giving them, but they share one thing: the certainty that this is not random. In the 6th century mind, the cosmos is a web of meaning, and the dim sun must be connected to human actions, to the favor or wrath of gods. And when humans believe the heavens are angry, they act. You hear of sacrifices, increasing in the Germanic territories, bog deposits of weapons, coins, even whole animals. Archaeologists in your own time will one day uncover these offerings, their placement dating suspiciously close to this strange year. Yet even as faith tries to explain the dimming, it can't stop the practical consequences. Temples may be fuller, but granaries are emptier. The prayers grow louder, but the bread loaves grow smaller. And in every culture, in every market and palace, people are slowly realizing that whatever the cause, divine, demonic or natural, the sun is not coming back to its full power anytime soon. And that, more than any prophecy or omen, is what frightens them most. Centuries later, you'll hear scientists speak of ash and sulfur riding the upper winds, of mountains vomiting fire on the far side of the world. But in 53 CE, no one has the tools to see the cause. You, however, get to straddle the centuries for a moment, peeking behind the curtain at what modern research has uncovered. Volcanologists now believe that somewhere, possibly in Iceland, maybe even in Central America, a massive volcanic eruption tore a hole in the earth and spewed millions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, not the lower atmosphere you breathe, but the high thin layer where winds can carry particles around the globe in days. Once there, the sulfur aerosols did something deceptively simple. They reflected sunlight back into space. That veil of particles acted like a giant thin mirror stretched around the planet, dimming the light in every city, village and farm from Greenland to the Yangtze. You didn't just get less light, you got colder temperatures. The clues come from ice. Modern glaciologists drill deep into the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, pulling up long cylinders of frozen history. Each layer is like a page in the world's diary, holding traces of dust, ash, and tiny trapped bubbles of air. In the layers dated to the mid-6th century, the scientists find a sudden spike in sulfur, along with microscopic volcanic glass shards blasted high into the sky and carried thousands of miles before falling back to Earth. The scale of the eruption staggers you. It wasn't just a Mount Vesuvius burying a single city. This was bigger, higher, colder, a blast so strong it made its presence known on both poles. The sun-dimming haze could have lingered for 18 months or more, enough to shift entire growing seasons. And here's the thing, there's evidence it might not have been just one eruption. Tree ring studies from across the northern hemisphere show an abrupt drop in growth in 53 CE, followed by another blow in 50. That means the Earth may have been struck twice in less than 5 years, each time by a volcano capable of altering the global climate. Still, even with all the science, one mystery remains: exactly which volcano did it? Iceland is a prime suspect. Its eruptions are perfectly placed to send ash swirling into the upper atmosphere and across Europe and Asia. Some researchers argue for a Central American culprit, pointing to ash chemistry that matches known eruptions there. Others say it could have been multiple volcanoes, a grim 1-2 punch from different corners of the globe. Back in 53 CE, of course, you don't know any of this. All you see is the result: a sky that refuses to brighten, fields that refuse to yield, seas that seem colder, and the creeping sense that something is broken far beyond your reach. And even if you could tell the people then about stratospheric aerosols and sulfur chemistry, it wouldn't matter. They'd still have to survive the hunger, the cold, and what's coming next, because a darkened sun is just the beginning of the 6th century's troubles. If you could follow that trail of volcanic ash from the dimmed skies of 53 CE all the way down into the deep freeze of time, you'd end up inside a block of ice, specifically, the cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica. There, the story of the year without sunlight is locked in crystals that have been quietly preserving the atmosphere's secrets for nearly 15 centuries. Picture it. Scientists in thick parkas, standing on the vast white expanse of the Greenland ice sheet, the wind cutting sideways across a horizon that never changes. They work in teams, drilling a narrow cylinder into the ice, each turn of the auger pulling up frozen layers that formed one thin sheet at a time. Year after year, the deeper they go, the further back in time they travel. When the cores from both poles are studied under microscopes and in clean labs, the same anomaly leaps out in layers dated to the mid-6th century. First, there's the chemical fingerprint, huge spikes in sulfate levels, far beyond normal background amounts. These are the markers of volcanic eruptions, the kind that send sulfur dioxide so high into the stratosphere that it takes years to settle out. Then there's the ash itself, tiny shards of volcanic glass, jagged and sharp under magnification. By studying their composition, researchers can sometimes match them to a known eruption site. In this case, the glass is still a puzzle. Some shards point to Icelandic volcanoes, others match material found in Central American eruptions. A few don't seem to match anything we've yet discovered, as if their parent mountain lies hidden or long since eroded. These findings fit neatly with the ancient accounts. Procopius in Constantinople described a pale, ghostly sun. Chinese records note frost in midsummer. Irish monks write of a bread failure. Each core sample's chemical spike is like the signature of those observations, laid down silently in snow while humans looked up in fear. The most sobering part, the cores don't just show one spike. In some there's a second surge just 4 years later in 53 CE. If the first eruption dimmed the sun and chilled the world, the second blow kept it cold long enough to cripple recovery. That double punch is now seen as one of the most dramatic volcanic events in recorded history. You imagine trying to explain this to a farmer in Thrace or a rice grower along the Yangtze in 53 CE. the that their frozen seedlings and meager harvests are the work of a mountain exploding thousands of miles away. It would sound like madness, and yet, the ice remembers. What the ice cores reveal is that Earth's climate system is brutally interconnected. A mountain you've never seen can change the fate of your crops, your village, even your empire. In 53.6 CE, that truth is still invisible to human understanding, but its consequences are about to be felt everywhere, from the markets of Constantinople to the fjords of Scandinavia. And just as the ash was carried on the wind, so too will the crisis drift into every corner of the known world. The haze in the sky does more than steal the light, it robs the warmth too. By the summer of 56 CE, the world is cooling in ways no one alive has experienced before. You feel it first in the mornings when you step outside and see your breath hang in the air, even though the calendar swears it's June. Modern scientists, looking back, estimate that average temperatures dropped by as much as 2 to 4 degrees Celsius across much of the northern hemisphere. That may sound small, but in agricultural terms, it's catastrophic. 1 or 2 degrees can decide whether your wheat ripens or rots, whether your pastures stay green or turn brown and barren. In Constantinople, the cooler air lingers all day, turning the summer breeze sharp enough to make you pull your cloak tighter. In Gaul, farmers delay planting, hoping the soil will warm, but it never does. In the highlands of Scotland, frost comes early, laying a silver sheen over the heather before autumn has even started. Rain patterns shift unpredictably. Some regions get drenched for weeks on end, others dry out completely. In the Levant, olive trees drop their blossoms before fruit sets. In parts of Central Asia, rivers run lower as snowmelt fails to arrive on time. Fishermen in the North Atlantic say the seas feel colder, and the familiar migration patterns of fish have gone strange. The change isn't uniform. Some places are spared the worst, others get slammed, but the overall effect is like the world's seasons have been nudged off balance. You hear about it in letters carried by merchants, the Danube running sluggish and low, the Nile floods arriving weak, the Baltic ports locked in ice earlier than anyone can remember. And this cooling doesn't last just a season. Tree ring studies, each ring marking a year of growth, show narrow, stunted bands for the next several years in oaks, pines and cedars from Britain to Mongolia. It's as if the whole biosphere has been holding its breath. For the people of 53.6 CE, the immediate impact is painfully clear. Grain that normally takes 4 months to ripen now takes 5 or 6, if it ripens at all. The growing season shrinks, so much that even hardy crops like barley struggle. Hay yields fall, meaning less feed for livestock in winter, and when the animals are hungry, the people get hungrier. Markets everywhere reflect the new reality. A loaf of bread in Constantinople now costs triple what it did last year. In rural markets, some coins are no longer enough. Traders want goods in exchange: wool, tools, even jewelry. In Scandinavia, where summers are already short, some communities slaughter nearly all their livestock early to avoid the cost of feeding them through what looks like a long, hard winter. The human body feels the cold differently when you're malnourished. In village after village, you see people wrapping themselves in extra layers, sleeping closer to the hearth, even in months when fires should have been banked. Chronic coughs spread. Children and the elderly suffer first. You don't have thermometers in 53.6 CE, but you don't need them. You just need to step outside, look up at the pale sun, and feel the absence of warmth seep into your bones. This isn't just weather, it's the climate itself, shifted in a way no one can predict, and it's starting to reshape daily life in every settlement under the dimmed sky. And deep down, even if no one can explain why, everyone is beginning to suspect one thing: this is only the start. In the Eastern Roman Empire, the dimmed sun and unseasonable chill quickly stop being curiosities and start becoming economic threats. Constantinople, the empire's glittering capital, is fed not just by the labor of nearby Thracian farmers, but by a sprawling network of supply lines that stretch across the Mediterranean. When those lines falter, the whole system trembles. You can see the tension building in the grain markets along the city's harbors. Normally, tall, square-sailed ships from Egypt arrive heavy with wheat, their holds full of the empire's most precious commodity. But in 53.6 CE, the first shipments of the season are lighter than expected. The grain merchants at the docks count the sacks twice, sometimes 3 times, scowling as they jot numbers on wax tablets. Egypt's own yields have dropped. Less sunshine means smaller harvests along the Nile floodplains, and with the river flooding weekly this year, irrigation channels can't keep all the fields wet. What grain does grow has to be shared among Egypt's cities before any surplus is sent north. The effect ripples outward. Bread prices in Constantinople creep upward, first by copper coins, then by silver. The state tries to stabilize costs through the anina, its grain distribution program. But even the imperial storehouses aren't bottomless. You watch long lines form outside the public granaries, the poor clutching sacks and baskets, hoping the grain doesn't run out before their turn comes. The emperor's treasury feels the strain too. Securing extra grain means paying higher prices to merchants willing to risk long voyages in uncertain seas. The cold weather has made storms more unpredictable, and pirates are quick to prey on slower, heavier laden ships. Hiring extra escorts from the imperial navy drains resources already stretched thin by wars on the frontiers. The shortage doesn't just hit the poor. Wealthy households start to notice their imported luxuries arriving late or not at all. Olive oil from Spain, wine from the Aegean Islands, silk from the East. Everything is harder to come by. The great banquets in marble villas become a little less extravagant, their tables holding more bread and beans, fewer exotic fruits and roasted meats. Economic anxiety seeps into politics. Senators murmur in the palace corridors, blaming one another for mismanaging supplies. Some whisper that Justinian is overreaching, spending too much on military campaigns when the empire's belly is empty. The hippodrome factions, always eager for a cause, start chanting slogans about bread prices between races. Even the coinage begins to feel the chill. The mint produces smaller runs of gold solidi as trade slows, and the empire hoards precious metals to pay for grain shipments. Market stalls that once brimmed with goods now stand half empty. In the countryside, tax collectors find resistance growing. Farmers facing poor harvests argue they can't meet the quotas. Some flee their lands entirely, heading toward the city in search of work or food. The imperial administration has to choose between pressing them harder or risking unrest. And unrest, in a city like Constantinople, is never far away. The memory of the Nika riots just a few years earlier still lingers, when factions and citizens turned on the emperor and nearly burned the city to the ground. Now, with bellies grumbling and prices rising, the ingredients for another outburst are falling into place. For now, the streets remain tense but orderly. The emperor's guards keep watch over the markets, and the granaries still open their gates each morning, but you can feel the mood shifting, like a storm cloud gathering behind the pale sky. If the dim sun doesn't brighten soon, the Eastern Roman Empire may find itself fighting not just wars abroad, but hunger and fury at home. When food runs short, bodies weaken, and when bodies weaken, sickness moves in like an uninvited guest who knows the door is already open. In 53-6 CE, no one yet knows that the world is quietly setting the stage for one of the deadliest pandemics in history, the Justinianic plague. The first hints are subtle. In the poorer quarters of Constantinople, you notice more coughing, more hollow cheeks, more people shuffling with the slow, tired gait of malnourishment. Weakened from months of smaller rations, their immune systems are like fortresses with the gates left ajar. Out on the trade routes, caravans are still moving, silk from the east, spices from India, grain from the Black Sea, but now those caravans carry more than goods. Fleas and rats, drawn to the sacks of grain and warm hides, scurry aboard ships and sneak into warehouses, and somewhere, far to the south in the Nile Delta, a deadly bacterium, Yersinia pestis, finds the perfect opportunity. Egypt is the empire's breadbasket, but it's also a hub of trade from Africa, the Red Sea and beyond. The dimmed sun and poor harvests there have disrupted normal rhythms. Grain sits in storage longer, ships linger in port waiting for full loads. That extra time gives rats and their fleas a chance to spread silently through the goods bound for Constantinople. By 54-4 CE, 5 years after the strange haze first appeared, the plague erupts in the empire's capital. But even before that explosion, you can feel the conditions for disaster lining up. Chronic undernourishment means even a bad winter cold can be deadly. Crowded quarters in port cities provide the perfect breeding ground for any illness. Trade routes ensure that once disease appears, it will move faster than any messenger can warn. Some healers blame the strange sun itself. They say the unnatural cold has corrupted the air, making it thick and unclean. Others cling to the theory of divine punishment, urging the emperor to repent and the people to pray. A few, more practically minded, suggest cleaning water sources and improving sanitation, but these voices are rare and often ignored. By the time the plague truly arrives, the population is too worn down to resist it. The famine years of 53-6-530 have left their mark. Shorter harvests, higher prices, smaller meals and the quiet erosion of health. In a sense, the Great Darkness has already claimed its first victims. The plague will simply finish what hunger began. In hindsight, the connection is clear. Climate shock weakens crops, famine weakens people, and weakened people fall quickly when disease comes knocking. But in the streets of Constantinople in 56, you don't yet know what's coming. You only see the signs, rats darting along the grain sacks, coughing in the market, and that uneasy sense that the city's defenses are being worn down one meal at a time. The sun still hides behind its pale veil, the air still carries that faint metallic tang, and life goes on. But somewhere in the unseen corners of the empire, death is already moving. Far to the west of Constantinople and across the seas, in the dense jungles and bustling city-states of Mesoamerica, the same atmospheric veil drapes over the world. You stand on a limestone plaza in the Maya lowlands, the carved stone stelae casting faint, ghost-like shadows even though the sun is supposedly high overhead. The air is cooler than it should be, the humidity dulled. For the Maya, this isn't just odd weather, it's a disruption to the precise balance that underpins their entire civilization. Their cities, Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, are supported by advanced agriculture, maize, beans, squash, cacao. These crops rely on the rhythm of the rainy and dry seasons, which in turn are guided by the sun's heat and the predictable migration of clouds. The dimmed light throws those rhythms askew. Maize plants grow slowly, their leaves paler, their tassels forming late. Without enough heat, cobs don't fill out properly, leading to smaller harvests. The rain too behaves strangely, falling at the wrong times, or not at all when it's needed most. In the highlands, frost strikes where it hasn't been seen in living memory, blackening plants overnight. You hear murmurs in the markets. The gods are displeased. Priests consult the sacred calendar, the Zolkin, looking for omens in the days and numbers. At the top of pyramid temples, incense curls into the sky as offerings are made. Cacao beans, feathers, jade beads to coax the sun back to full strength. Even without written records like Procopius's histories or the Chinese chronicles, the Maya leave clues. Archaeologists in your own time will find growth interruptions in ancient tree rings from the region, as well as evidence of changes in crop residues and storage patterns in this period. Some centers seem to show signs of resource stress, fortifications strengthened, trade patterns shifting as if communities were adapting to a threat they couldn't see but could feel in their stomachs. In the great marketplaces, the effects become tangible. Cacao beans, used as currency, grow more valuable as yields drop. The rich still drink their frothy chocolate in ornate cups, but the poor find it harder to come by. Dried fish from the coasts arrives less often. Salt caravans from inland move with fewer loads. The Maya are masters of water management, reservoirs, canals, and raised fields, but even the best systems depend on steady input from the sky. When that fails, the reservoirs don't refill, the canals run shallow, and the raised fields dry at the edges. Some cities respond with ceremony, others with practical adaptation, expanding trade networks to bring in food from less affected areas, or shifting planting strategies, but none can escape the reality that something vast is wrong in the heavens. In the absence of a known cause, the explanations remain spiritual. Stories circulate of great smoke rising from mountains in distant lands, of sky serpents swallowing the sun, of cycles in which the world grows cold before being reborn. These aren't so different from the myths told in Scandinavia or the omens read in China. They're all human attempts to make sense of a sun that no longer keeps its ancient promise. Here, too, the darkness isn't just in the sky, it's in the uncertainty, in the gnawing sense that the world's order has been disturbed, and no one can say when or if it will be restored. Far to the north, in the lands of the fjords and frozen forests, the people of Scandinavia face the dim sun with a mixture of fear, pragmatism, and deep ritual. You stand on the edge of a bog in what will one day be Denmark, the air thick with the earthy scent of peat and wet moss. In the distance, smoke rises from a small settlement, but here, the only movement is the rippling of water around a wooden platform where men and women gather in solemn silence. They are here to give something to the gods. Into the bog they lower weapons, spears with iron heads, shields faced with rawhide. Some carry bundles of animal bones, others whole carcasses of sheep and goats. A few bring worked gold and silver, treasures that could have bought food now surrendered to the murky water. These are sacrifices, meant to restore balance. The sagas that will one day be told speak of a great winter before the end of the world, Fimbulvitra, the mighty winter that signals Ragnarok, a sun that hides, and a cold that bites. In midsummer, are as close to that prophecy as anyone wants to get. The offerings are insurance against cosmic disaster. The countryside shows the strain. In southern Sweden, fields of barley, normally resilient against the northern chill, are stunted. Hunters bring back less game. Deer herds have wandered farther in search of better forage, and the cold has thinned the small animals that usually survive near human settlements. The seas, too, seem empty of their usual summer catch. In longhouses, the talk turns grim. Elders remember past famines when bad weather claimed whole families. But this feels different. It's not just a poor summer, it's the sense that the very sun has weakened. Fires are kept burning longer, even in months when the hearth would normally be banked during the day. Wool cloaks stay on the shoulders even when work is hard. Archaeologists in your own time will find the traces of this fear. Bog offerings peaking in frequency during this mid-6th century period, the objects more valuable and the deposits larger. Some will argue that these were community efforts, rituals binding people together in the face of a threat they couldn't fight with weapons. Others will see them as desperate acts, last attempts to bargain with forces beyond understanding. The Norse and their neighbors have always lived on the edge of survival, their summers short and precious. When the sun fails, it's not just an inconvenience, it's an existential danger. The response blends religion and necessity. Sacrifice to win the gods' favor. Store whatever food you can, and prepare for the possibility that this pale summer may be followed by an even harsher winter. At the feasts that still mark the turning of the seasons, the mead flows less freely. Roasted meat is rarer, replaced with stews of root vegetables and preserved fish. Jokes are fewer, laughter more subdued. The younger ones may not understand the depth of the worry, but the elders do. They've seen how quickly scarcity can turn to hunger, and hunger to death. Here, under the veiled northern sun, you feel that same knowledge settling into every conversation, every glance toward the sky. It's not just the cold, it's the sense that the world's great wheel has slipped a notch, and no one knows how or if it can be set right again. Just when the world begins to hope the sky might clear, the second blow lands. In 5040 CE, barely 4 years after the first haze descended, another massive volcanic eruption darkens the heavens again. Whatever fragile recovery some regions managed after 53/6 is snuffed out almost overnight. Modern scientists, piecing together the story from ice cores and tree rings, see it clearly. Another huge sulfur spike, another set of microscopic shards of volcanic glass embedded in polar ice. This was not a lingering effect from the early eruption. This was fresh ash, fresh aerosols hurled into the stratosphere by yet another cataclysm. The culprit remains uncertain, possibly a Southeast Asian volcano, perhaps Alapango in modern-day El Salvador, but the scale rivals the first disaster. Back in the 6th century, no one has a name for it. They only know the dim sun returns before it ever truly left. You're in Constantinople when the change is obvious. Just as the light was beginning to brighten a little, it fades again. The air regains that metallic tang. The days cool, even in the heart of summer. For farmers, it's a crushing blow. Some had dared to plant more ambitiously in 5-3-9, encouraged by slightly better yields. Now their hopes wither. Wheat fields in Anatolia never reach full height. Along the Nile, the floodwaters fail again, and the smaller harvests mean grain ships to the capital are once more nearly empty. In Ireland, the monks add another bleak note to the annals. Another year of hunger, another season when the bread fails. The compounded effect is brutal. 2 climate shocks in less than a decade mean that food stores are not just low, they're exhausted. Villages that survived the first round by eating stored grain or slaughtering extra livestock now have nothing left to fall back on. People sell tools, land, even themselves into bondage just to survive. The social strain deepens. In Gaul, petty conflicts over grazing rights flare into outright skirmishes between neighboring communities. In the Balkans, migration patterns shift as people abandon poor farmland for regions they hope are less affected. In Scandinavia, where summers are already short, the double blow prompts more ritual offerings, and possibly drives some to leave altogether, seeking more forgiving lands. The political consequences ripple outward. In the Eastern Roman Empire, Justinian's grand building projects slow as resources are diverted toward keeping the grain supply alive. In the West, kingdoms already fragile after Rome's fall face even more instability as famine undermines the loyalty of their subjects. And everywhere, the memory of the first darkening shapes the response to the second. People no longer dismiss it as a passing omen. They know now that this kind of sky can linger for years, and that the hunger it brings is merciless. Superstition deepens, rituals multiply. In some places, human sacrifice makes a grim return, driven by the desperate belief that only the most costly offerings can bring back the sun. If 53-6 was a shock, 5040 feels like confirmation that the world is truly in a colder, darker phase from which it may not emerge for a generation. And as you look up at the pale, diminished sun for the second time in your lifetime, you realize something. Survival is no longer about waiting for the light to return, it's about learning to live in the shadow. By the mid-6th century, after years of dim skies, shortened growing seasons, and famine, the world is not the same place it was in 55. The climate shift triggered by the twin eruptions of 56 and 540 has reshaped entire societies. In Europe, some communities have simply ceased to exist. Villages abandoned during the leanest years are left to the weeds, roofs collapse, and fields go feral as survivors move on in search of better land. Migration patterns shift noticeably, small groups merge into larger ones for mutual defense and to pool resources. In some areas, this consolidation leads to new centers of power, in others it sparks conflict over leadership and territory. The Eastern Roman Empire still stands, but it's leaner and more cautious. Justinian's ambitious wars to reconquer Italy strain the treasury, and with the grain supply unstable, the emperor has to balance military glory against the basic need to feed his people. Even the most gilded parts of Constantinople feel the pinch. Banquets are smaller, markets less lively, and the sense of imperial invincibility has dulled. In the far north, the cooling climate pushes some Scandinavian communities toward more permanent overseas expeditions. Archaeologists in your own time will find traces of settlements and trading posts in regions they hadn't occupied before, suggesting that the environmental pressure was strong enough to push people into riskier ventures. Across Asia, the same story unfolds in different ways. In China, the dimming years are remembered in official histories as a time of cold, crop failure, and political strain. Dynastic instability always simmers when the mandate of heaven is thought to be in doubt, and the altered climate fuels both rebellion and the shuffling of borders. In Central Asia, nomadic tribes adjust their seasonal routes, moving to new pastures that can still support their herds. This in turn alters the balance of power along the Silk Road and affects trade with lands thousands of miles away. Even far-off cultures that never directly traded with each other feel the same overarching pressure. How to survive in a world where the weather no longer keeps its promises. Mesoamerican city-states alter planting schedules and expand trade networks to bring in missing staples. In the Andes, communities shift their terraced farming to different elevations, seeking a balance between frost and drought. Culturally, the changes seep into art, myth and religion. Stories of a sun that failed begin to take root in oral traditions, from Ireland to the Himalayas. In some cases, the events are remembered as divine punishment, in others, as a cosmic battle or a test of the people's endurance. Rituals adapt, some turn more elaborate, others more desperate. Economically, long-distance trade never fully recovers to pre-53-6 levels in some regions. Certain luxury goods become rarer for generations, not just because of political instability, but because the networks that supplied them fractured under the strain. And yet, humans are nothing if not adaptable. New crops better suited to cooler climates start to be tried, hardier grains, root vegetables, even plants from other regions carried along slow, ancient trade routes. Communities fortify their storage systems, learning the hard lesson that a single bad year can be survivable, but a string of them requires foresight. What emerges from the decades after 53-50, 50-40 is a world both more fractured and more resilient. Some societies collapse under the combined weight of famine, disease, and political strain. Others bend without breaking, reshaping themselves to meet the new reality. But whether they flourish or fade, every community that lived through the years without sunlight carries the same memory that the sky can change without warning, and when it does, it can change everything. Now, looking back from the edge of this dark chapter, you can trace the full arc of the crisis that began in 56C, the pale sun, the cold summers, the failed harvests, the plague. Each was a thread, and together they wove a net that caught the entire known world. No one escaped its reach, not emperors in their marble halls, not monks in their stone cloisters, not farmers bent over frost-bitten fields. Modern scientists call it the late antique, Little Ice Age, a period of sustained cooling that lasted well into the 7th century. Tree rings, ice cores, and sediment records show its fingerprints from the Arctic to the equator, but for those who lived through it, there was no name, only the lived reality of scarcity, fear and adaptation. In Constantinople, the crisis left a permanent mark on policy. The grain supply became an even greater priority, leading to stronger state control and a more cautious approach to military expansion. In China, the dimming years became part of the ebb of histories, a warning to future rulers that the heavens could turn against them. In the far north, oral traditions preserved the memory of strange summers and hard winters, weaving them into myths of great winters and sun-eating beasts. Culturally, the disaster reinforced a truth as old as humanity itself, that survival depends not just on strength, but on cooperation. Archaeological evidence from across the northern hemisphere shows increased communal storage, shared defense structures, and cooperative labor during this period. Hardship forced people to think in terms of we rather than me. The double eruptions of 53 and 5040 didn't just dim the sun, they dimmed the certainty people had in the natural order. For centuries afterward, communities kept a sharper eye on the sky, wary of changes in its color or warmth. Farmers became more conservative in planting, kings more cautious in their ambitions, and religious leaders more fervent in their rituals. In your own time, the story serves as both a mystery and a warning. The exact volcanoes that unleashed the Veil of Aerosols may never be conclusively identified, but the chain reaction they set in motion is clear: climate shift, crop failure, famine, disease, political upheaval. The 6th century learned it the hard way. We know it because they lived and struggled through it. And yet, through all the darkness, the human story is one of endurance. The people of 53-6 CE could not clear the sky, but they could tighten their belts, share their grain, adjust their planting, and pray for a brighter tomorrow. Eventually the veil did lift, the warmth did return, and the world, changed but still turning, moved on. So now, as the fires in our